RI7 Purpose deals with identifying why an author is writing or speaking. And of all the targets we're studying, this is quite a crucial one because, quite frankly, if you don't understand why someone is saying to you what they're saying, you are very open to being manipulated, and no one wants that. Taking a look at the target, this is another one that really builds from that one level. At the one level, you can identify an author's purpose in a text. Basically, you're going to be able to give me at least one sentence as to why the author wrote what they did or said what they did, and you'll be accurate, of course. At the 2 level, not only can you identify the purpose, but you can also take a look at the rhetoric. At the bare minimum, you're identifying how the author uses it. So once again, this will be pretty short. You're simply going to be saying how rhetoric is used, and we're going to be going into a definition of rhetoric pretty quick here. At the 3 level, you can tell me what the purpose is, and you can identify the rhetoric used, but you can also analyze it. And now we start to get into a bit of a definition here. Rhetoric is going to be style and content. You're going to be able to break that down and give me examples of the content and the style of the piece. At the 4 level, not only can you identify and analyze it, you can also evaluate it. Tell me how effective that style and content happens to be. Now we should probably have a good working definition of purpose here. I like to think of this one as a bit of a mathematical equation. Purpose is audience plus intended outcome. And that means that purpose has to be an action. Okay? It is not simply to understand, but it's to actually get people to do something. It's more than just understanding. I do not want to see that written down from any of you. It's meant to be an action. The claim is what we usually talk about in our own writing and what we've been talking about in the literature that we've looked at so far. Claim is the what it says, purpose is why. There's another way for you to think about it. Now, rhetoric is a word that came up earlier. You'll need to be able to tell me what the purpose is and how rhetoric is being used to achieve it. There are 2 avenues to explore when it comes to rhetoric. One is the content of a text, and we've already done a lot of work with this. This deals with identifying the claim and the types of details that are being used. It's been a while since we've talked about it, so just as a reminder, logos is fact or data. Ethos is going to be authority or ethics. And pathos will be emotional appeal. Okay. It also deals with style of a text, which is something somewhat new to us. We've talked about a few pieces of this. As far as word choice goes, you're going to be looking to see, is it simple word choice, things that you would hear in everyday language, or is it going to be elevated word choice, things that you wouldn't necessarily hear in everyday language. Think of someone trying to impress you with really unique vocabulary words. That would be an example of elevated word choice. For sentence structure, simple, again, short sentences, not many clauses going on, or complex. We have longer sentences with lots of clauses that can get a little bit confusing. You got to take your time with them, but they tend to give us more information. For organization, you can refer back to your notes on RI4-5, text structure. Okay. But think cause and effect, problem solution, chronological, and so on. For figurative language, you can refer back to your notes on RI6, RL5. We had several forms of figurative language that we studied. Think personification, metaphor, simile, antithesis. And then for mood or tone, we talked a little bit about this with our RI6, RL5 notes, but remember we're looking at the emotion of the piece overall. What is it trying to evoke in us? What is the emotion of the author coming through? You can consider it in both ways. What's your sense of how the author feels about the subject? Now, to move from the 3 to the 4 level, you'll need to be able to move from analysis to evaluation. So we've talked about these before, but just as a reminder to you, for analysis, you're giving examples, you're breaking down the text, you're answering the question here, how does the author structure his style and evidence? If you want to move up to that 4 level, you need to evaluate. Consider it as how does the author structure and style, his style and evidence to help or not reach the outcome. You'll really need to consider the audience here, how you think the audience would have reacted in that time period not in our modern time period necessarily for some of these pieces, because certainly times have changed, and we would react much differently in some cases than the people who these were originally written for. And then, as always, give examples. That should just be a given no matter what you happen to be doing for me. We'll take a look at our example text here, the Cornpone Opinions excerpt from Mark Twain, once again. So, as a reminder, we're going to be looking for the purpose of the piece. We'll need to consider who the audience would be, and I can help you out with that for most of our texts. Right now, for Mark Twain, this particular piece, interestingly enough, was never published while he was alive. It was written toward the end of his writing career in the late 1800s. Mark Twain lived through the Civil War. He lived through a lot of upheaval in our nation. And so when we see him writing about people having their own opinion about the events going on around them, we need to take that into context, that he did live through a very turbulent time, and that he did see a lot of people siding with one group or another, perhaps with the South or the North, without really thinking through why they were doing it. So we can consider our audience then people of the 1800s who were making some very important decisions for our nation's future. So that's our audience. Now let's consider why he might have written this piece. We know from earlier analysis that this piece is about not having your own independent verdict. That is a rare thing for people to think for themselves. He gives examples of different groups who just believe what they do based on how they were born. And he basically says public opinion is viewed as the voice of God, but he really suggests that that's not a good thing. It's no particular value. It's a mistake to do that. He really wants us to think for ourselves. And so when we're thinking about why he wrote this piece, this really harsh piece on the fact that most people do not think for themselves, what was his intended outcome? He would want people to think for themselves. So people need to think for themselves. That is the action that he would want them to take. Okay? Don't just follow blindly what the people around you are doing. So that helps us find our purpose here. Now we need to take a look at the style of the piece. We're looking at word choice first. Is it simple or elevated? Looking through this, see a lot of words that would really be considered elevated, not things that you would hear in everyday language. Most of us don't really talk about persuasion or verdict. Here's another one. I'll circle these for word choice. Sect would be another one. Furnish, not really a common word. Monarchist. Let's see. Convictions. Partial, not really a commonly used word in everyday speech. Aggregation. So overall we have an elevated word choice, a lot of words that you would not normally hear in daily conversation. For sentence structure, we're looking for, is it simple or is it complex? Do we have short sentences or longer sentences? I see, just to start with, quite a few longer sentences. Now I need to see what types of details are included. Even just looking at this listing piece here, the Mohammedans are Mohammedans because they are born and reared among that sect, not because they thought it out and can furnish some reasons for being Mohammedans. So we have two complete clauses there, connected with a semicolon, which means that sentence hasn't really ended, and it goes on and on with more examples. So it's a very complex sentence that we are seeing in that particular case. If we look at the bottom of the piece, we have shorter sentences. It's held in reverence. It settles everything. So we have some simple sentences there. So mixed sentence structure. But if we look at the bulk of this particular example, leaning more toward complex. As far as organization goes, we've talked about this one already. This is a problem and solution piece, talking about the problem of people not thinking for themselves, no solution given. And let's see, for figurative language, talked about this a little bit before too. You've got a bit of antithesis here and some repetition. Thieves in amongst all these religious groups. A counterexample, typically we view religion as good, thieves certainly not good, so we've got some antithesis going on here. The overall mood, tone of the piece, given the really strong language, the elevated language that Twain is using, monarchist, thieves, mistake, aggregation, this voice of God illusion that we have here, this is a pretty negative tone. He really does not seem to appreciate the fact that people don't think for themselves, so a very negative tone. And as far as types of details that are being used, again, we talked about this one a little bit before. Pulling on a reference to God, we've got a bit of ethos appeal. with this great list of why people believe what they believe. While it could be opinion, I think we have to take it that this is in Twain's own observation, and from his standpoint then is logos, detail, is a bit of fact. And then when we consider our final question for purpose, do the details and style help the author meet his purpose? Well, in his time period and in ours, we always need to consider elevated language closely. If he is writing about the general population not thinking for themselves, will the general population be able to understand his elevated language and his complex sentence structure? Probably not. And in that case, this text is not going to be very effective. Now, for a more intellectual crowd, certainly, with this kind of language and structure, it'd be just fine, but Twain might perhaps argue that those are the people who are already thinking for themselves. So, considering just the general population, not an effective piece.